Story 1. The Drop-Off on Fire Road 9. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was living just outside of Olympia, Washington. I was working as a medical courier for a third-party logistics company. Basically, when nursing homes or private clinics needed specific meds or samples transported after hours, I was the guy they called. It wasn't a bad gig. I drove my own SUV, got paid a decent mileage rate, and listened to audiobooks all night. But the Pacific Northwest gets pitch black once you get off the interstate, and the damp, foggy chill really seeps into your bones around 2 a.m. One Tuesday night, dead quiet, barely any cars on the road, I got a ping on my work tablet. It was a STAT order, meaning immediate priority. The pickup was standard, just a small sealed biohazard box from a 24-hour pharmacy. But the drop-off location made me pause. It was an address I didn't recognize, located way up near the Olympic National Forest. I punched it into my GPS, and the route looked like a jagged scar winding deep into the boondocks. No paved roads for the last 3 miles. Usually I'd call dispatch to confirm an address that remote, but the notes on the order were oddly specific. Gate code 1984. Drive to the detached workshop behind the main house. Leave package on the metal workbench. Do not disturb residents. It sounded sketchy, sure, but I needed the overtime money for rent. So I grabbed the box and headed out. The drive was grueling. Once I turned off the highway, the fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in front of my hood. The trees towered over the road like prison bars. By the time I hit the gravel track leading to the property, my nerves were already fried. The house was completely dark. It was this looming 2-story craftsman that looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in 30 years. I drove past it, tires crunching loudly on the gravel, and found the detached workshop around the back, just like the notes said. I killed the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy and oppressive. The only sound was the tick, tick, tick of my cooling engine and the distant drip of moisture falling from the Douglas firs. I grabbed the package and my flashlight, stepping out into the cold mist. The workshop was a corrugated metal building, rusted around the edges. I walked up to the side door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my foot, shining my light inside. It was empty, save for a single metal workbench in the center. I stepped inside to place the box down. That's when I heard it. The sound of a radio squelch. K-ch-k. It came from the darkness outside, behind me. I froze. My first thought was that I was about to get robbed by some meth cooks who used these woods to hide their labs. I slowly turned around, hands up, heart hammering against my ribs. But it wasn't a junkie. 2 figures emerged from the tree line. They were dressed in full tactical gear, heavy vests, helmets, night vision goggles flipped up. They didn't have standard police uniforms. They looked like military, or maybe federal agents. One of them raised a gloved hand, signaling me to stop. He didn't point his rifle at me, which was the only reason I didn't pass out right there. But his body language was tense. He walked up to me, his boots making zero noise on the wet ground. He was close enough that I could see the condensation on his breath. "Courier?" he whispered. His voice was flat, professional. "Yeah?" I stammered, pointing to the box on the table. Just dropping off a stat order." "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer. He glanced at the box, then looked toward the dark main house about 50 yards away. I followed his gaze. In an upstairs window of the house, a blind shifted, just an inch. Someone was watching us. The agent turned back to me, his eyes hard. He reached into his vest, pulled out a badge, FBI, flashed it for half a second and put it away. "Get back in your vehicle," he said, his voice barely audible. "Turn off your headlights. Roll down the driveway in neutral until you hit the main road. Then drive. Do not stop. Do not speed." "But the package—" "Leave it," he cut me off. "Go. Now." I didn't argue. I scrambled back into my SUV, sweating despite the freezing air. I did exactly as he said. I put it in neutral, killed the lights, and let gravity pull me down the driveway. As I rolled past the tree line, I saw them. Not just 2 agents. There were at least a dozen of them, crouched in the brush, completely camouflaged. They were forming a perimeter around the house. Silent. Invisible. I didn't turn my headlights on until I hit the asphalt, and then I drove home with my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I checked the news the next day, and the day after that. Nothing. No reports of a raid, no drug busts, no hostage situations in that area. But here's the thing that still messes with me. The package I delivered? I saw the label. It was insulin. Why would a house that was being actively sieged by a tactical FBI team order insulin? My best guess is that the person inside knew the feds were out there. Maybe they ordered the delivery to force the agent's hand, using me as a civilian shield to see if they would break cover. Or maybe the agents let me through because stopping me would have alerted the target that the trap was set. Either way, I was a pawn in something dangerous that night. I quit the courier job 2 weeks later. The money was good, but not good enough to be bait. Story 2. The room that wasn't on the blueprints. I've always been a sucker for fixer-uppers. There's something romantic about buying a piece of history and bringing it back to life. Or at least that's what I told my wife, Kelly, when we signed the deed on a 1920s farmhouse in rural Ohio, about an hour outside of Columbus. We moved in last October with our 4-year-old son, Leo. The place was a beast. Creaky floorboards, drafty windows, and a basement that smelled like wet earth. But it had good bones. The first month was just endless sanding and painting. We were so exhausted that we ignored the little things. Food going missing from the pantry, which we blamed on field mice. Footsteps overhead when we were in the kitchen, which we blamed on the house settling. You know how it is. You rationalize everything when you're tired. The incident happened 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Kelly was working a night shift at the hospital, so it was just Leo and me. I had put Leo to bed around 8 p.m. in his room on the 2nd floor. It was a renovated space that used to be part of a larger attic. I was downstairs watching a football game when I heard it. A thud. Not a creak, but a heavy, distinct impact directly above my head. I muted the TV. The house was dead silent, except for the wind rattling the corn stalks outside. Then, I heard Leo crying. I took the stairs 2 at a time. When I burst into his room, Leo was standing up in his crib, pointing a shaking finger at his closet. "Daddy, the bad man is coughing," he sobbed. My blood ran cold. I scooped Leo up, shushing him, and listened. At first, nothing. Then, clear as day, I heard a wet, hacking cough. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the back wall of the closet. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was half protective rage and half primal fear. I carried Leo out to the hallway and told him to go into the master bedroom and lock the door. I went back into his room. I didn't have a weapon, so I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight I kept on the nightstand. I crept toward the closet. The coughing had stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic scratching sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I shined the light on the back of the closet. The drywall looked normal, but there was a seam in the wallpaper I hadn't noticed before. I leaned in close, putting my ear against the plaster. I heard breathing. Slow, ragged breathing. "Who's in there?" I shouted, trying to sound tougher than I felt. The breathing stopped. Then a voice, hoarse and dry like sandpaper, whispered from right behind the wall. "Not your house." Before I could react, the entire back wall of the closet exploded outward. Plaster and dust flew everywhere. A man launched himself out of the hole like a feral animal. He was emaciated, wearing rags that looked like they used to be a janitor's uniform. His skin was gray, and his eyes were wide and bloodshot. I stumbled back, tripping over a rug. The man didn't attack me immediately. He stood there in the center of my son's room, twitching, clutching a sharpened screwdriver in his hand. I scrambled to my feet and bolted into the hallway, slamming the bedroom door shut and holding the knob with both hands. He hit the door from the other side with terrifying force. Bam! Bam! The wood splintered around the frame. He was screaming now, unintelligible, high-pitched shrieks that sounded more avian than human. I knew the door wouldn't hold. I abandoned it and ran to the master bedroom, grabbing Leo. We ran downstairs and out the front door into the freezing night. I didn't stop until we were inside my truck with the doors locked. As I fumbled with my keys to start the ignition, I looked back at the house. The man was standing in the window of my son's bedroom, watching us. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was pressing his face against the glass, flattening his nose, just staring. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. They sent a canine unit in. They dragged the guy out in handcuffs. He was kicking and biting the whole way. Here's the part that really messed me up. When the officers inspected the hole in the closet, they found a narrow, hidden room behind the knee wall. It wasn't on the blueprints. Inside, they found a sleeping bag, piles of candy wrappers and canned food stole from our pantry, and a bucket for, well, waste. But they also found a peephole. The guy had drilled a tiny hole through the plaster, hidden behind a poster in Leo's room. It was angled directly at the crib. The detective told me the guy had likely been living in the house since it was abandoned 2 years prior. He considered us the intruders. We moved out the next day. We put the house back on the market as is. We took a huge financial loss, but I don't care. I still have nightmares about that whisper. Not your house. And honestly, I think he was right. It was never ours. Story 3. The Blackout at Jumbo Rocks. I don't tell this story often because, frankly, it makes me sound like I've lost my mind. I'm a structural engineer. I deal in physics, loads, and concrete reality. But what happened in the Mojave Desert 3 years ago defies every law of physics I know. My younger brother, Ryan, and I are amateur photographers. Every August, we try to get out of Los Angeles to catch the Perseid meteor shower. That year, we decided to head out to Joshua Tree National Park. We secured a backcountry permit so we could hike away from the main campgrounds, looking for zero light pollution. We found the perfect spot near a cluster of those massive, smooth boulders the park is famous for. It was a clear night, dry and cool. By 11 p.m., we had our tripod set up, pointing northeast. We were cracking open a couple of cold beers, just chatting about work and relationships, waiting for the show to start. The atmosphere was incredible. If you've never been to the high desert at night, the silence is almost aggressive. It's so quiet you can hear the blood rushing in your ears. Around 11:45 p.m., the meteors started. It was a good year for them. We were oohing and aahing like little kids, snapping long exposure shots. "Check this one out," Ryan said, pointing to a particularly bright streak on his camera's LCD screen. I leaned over to look. "Nice," I said. "I think I need to adjust my ISO. It's coming out a little grainy." I turned back to my own camera. I looked down at the dial. I remember my thumb resting on the little jagged wheel of the camera. I clicked it 1 notch to the right. That was it. 1 click. A fraction of a second. When I looked up, Ryan was gone. I don't mean he had walked away. I mean the folding chair he was sitting in was empty and, this is the part that made my stomach drop, his camera was off. The little green light that had been blinking a second ago was dark, and it was cold. Freezing cold. The air had gone from a pleasant desert cool to a biting chill that penetrated my hoodie instantly. "Ryan?" I said. My voice sounded thin in the open air. I spun around. "Ryan, quit screwing around!" No answer. Just the wind whistling through the rocks. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the area. Nothing. Just sand, scrub brush, and rocks. I looked at my watch. I froze. I stared at the glowing hands until my eyes watered. It was 4:15 a.m. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That was impossible. I had looked down at 11:45 p.m. I blinked. I turned a dial, and somehow, 4.5 hours had vanished. Panic set in. Real primal panic. I started screaming Ryan's name, running in circles around our campsite. I thought maybe he'd fallen. Maybe a mountain lion got him, though they're rare. Maybe he'd had a medical emergency. I packed up my gear with shaking hands, leaving his tripod right where it was, and sprinted the 2 miles back to where we parked the car. When I got to the trailhead, my heart stopped. Ryan was sitting on the hood of my Jeep, wrapped in a foil emergency blanket, shivering. His face was pale, and he looked terrified. When he saw me, he didn't look relieved. He looked furious. "Where the hell have you been?" he screamed, jumping off the hood. "Where have I been?" I yelled back. "You're the one who vanished. I looked down to change my ISO and you were gone." Ryan stopped dead. He looked at me with this mix of confusion and horror. "Mark," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't go anywhere. I was sitting right next to you. You were staring at your camera. I asked you a question and you didn't answer. You just froze." He told me he had shaken my shoulder, but I wouldn't move. He said I was catatonic. Standing there, rigid, staring at my camera dial for hours. He tried to drag me, but I was heavy like a statue. Eventually he got scared, really scared, thinking I was having a stroke or a seizure, so he ran to the car to drive to the ranger station to get help. But he realized I had the keys in my pocket. So he waited. He waited for 4 hours while I stood there like a mannequin in the desert. But from my perspective, not even a second had passed. We drove home in silence. We didn't even pack up Ryan's gear. We just left $1,000 worth of camera equipment out there in the sand. Neither of us wanted to walk back into that dark. We tried to compare notes later, to find holes in each other's stories, but we couldn't. He remembers a night of terror trying to wake his unresponsive brother. I remember a blink. I still have the SD card from that night. The last photo I took is timestamped 11:46 p.m. The next file is a corrupt black image timestamped 4:17 a.m. I don't go to Joshua Tree anymore, and I don't look at the sky for too long. I'm afraid that next time I blink, I might wake up and find that my whole life has passed me by.